Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here with my wrap-up video for the One Readathon to Rule Them All. This is an all-fantasy readathon created and hosted by Ashley from Don't Have a Degree in Reading, whom I will link down below. Also, I didn't finish all of these in the span of the readathon because I didn't read as much as I wanted to during that week or so I just continued with my TBR because I was enjoying the readathon so much. Anyway, the first book I finished was The Grey Wolf Throne by Cinda Williams Chima. This is the third book in the Seven Realms series, and as with many fantasy series, it gets harder and harder to summarize these as they go on because I don't want to spoil things. But we follow our main character Rhaesa, who is the princess of this realm, and Han Alistair is the other protagonist, and he is a thief who may have more secrets in his past than we know about. And basically this book is a lot more political than the previous two. There's a lot more court intrigue, and I really enjoyed this one. This, I think, is my favorite of the series so far. I'm also sort of getting used to the fact that the first 100 pages of any of these books is really, really slow, and it feels like it doesn't need to be there. And I think partly that's just because the summaries on these kind of tell you what happens in the middle of the book, but they make it sound like it happens at the beginning. I love the writing. I absolutely love the characters, like especially Rhaesa. She is just, oh my god, queen of my heart. Like, I love her so much. She is so clever and just strong, and she has grown so much from the first book while still retaining her personality. She's doing what has to be done. She's making hard decisions, and she sometimes, like, she makes mistakes. She's not perfect, but I always feel like I know why she does the things she does, and honestly that's the most important thing for me. I really love Micah. Micah Bayar is one of the antagonists, and I don't know what's going to happen with him. He might turn out to be like an actual villain and not just an intriguing side antagonist, but we'll see what happens. And I gave The Grey Wolf Throne 4 out of 5 stars. Oh, and this was for the challenge to read a fantasy book that featured a person of color as the main character, and Rhaesa is. Next, I picked up Furthermore by Tahara Mafi. This was for the challenge to read a fantasy book by a person of color. This follows our main character Alice, and she lives in this world where magic is very prevalent. It's part of people, and it's like their currency, it's their world. And then she decides to go to this world called Furthermore, which is even more magical and strange, but much, much deadlier. And she goes along with Oliver, this sort of friend/enemy, and Alice, is in search of her father, who has disappeared and has been missing. And I really enjoyed this. I think Tahara Mafi's writing style is so, in this book, it was just so beautiful and so suited to this kind of middle grade fantasy that she was telling. There are just so many gorgeous lines, and so many lines about Alice and about being lonely and about family, and just, I love the depth that this book had. Like, on the surface it's like, oh, this crazy adventure with this magical world, but there was so much depth to Alice and to her personality and the characters and what she wanted from life. And there were a couple things I didn't love as much. Like, I think that the whole misunderstanding or the lack of communication between her friend Oliver and her about like their mission and about the world of Furthermore, I thought that went on a little too long, especially when Furthermore is such a dangerous place that it's like, Oliver, just tell her what she needs to know. But overall, I really enjoyed this. I think especially if you go in like trying to tell yourself not to expect, like not to try and predict where the story goes. And also, like, the magic system I have seen really criticized because it's not laid out for you. And if you're somebody who it's like, I need like Brandon Sanderson level explanations for all my fantasy books, this might drive you crazy because some aspects of it aren't explained, but to me it really worked because that in itself was an explanation. Like, it felt very suited to the world and to the characters and to the story, and I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I really hope Tahara Mafi keeps writing middle grade fantasy because I think she's brilliant at it. Next, I picked up Maresi by Maria Turchyanov, and this was translated by AA Prime, and this was for the challenge to read a translated fantasy novel. We follow our main character Maresi, and she lives at this place called the Red Abbey, and it's this order of nuns and sisters. It's a religious order, and it's also a place where they take care of girls and women who have suffered, and especially at the hands of men. It's basically a safe haven for them. And Maresi is very, very happy living there until one day a girl named Jai comes to this Red Abbey, and things kind of get set in motion about the people who want to get her back and what this could mean for the safety and the peace of the Abbey and these other girls. and I adored this book so much. This book is really hard to pin down as far as the age category, which you guys know I love when that happens, because Maresi is 13, so she's sort of right in between the age range, but like between middle grade and YA novels, but the themes of this book are so intense and so upsetting sometimes. Like, there is discussion and a scene with sexual assault. There's a representation of honor killings, and there's an unflinching look at sexism and at the terrible things that are done to women. And I think that's one of this book's strengths, that Maria Turchaninov does not shy away from showing these things, because yes, Maresi is young, but she's not ignorant. Like, she knows that there are bad things in the world, and especially Jai. She has grown up with these things. She knows there are bad things in the world, so it wouldn't make sense not to talk about them. And this is just such a beautiful story. It's heartbreaking sometimes, but it's so powerful. The writing is really beautiful. The world is just gorgeously written, and the world building and how that works in with the beliefs and practices of the Red Abbey and how that affects their work is just, it's so beautifully woven, and I just love all the female characters in this book. I love the bonds they have with each other and the way that the author really shows the lengths that women go to protect each other, and this is just, I recommend it for fans of fantasy, for people who want a fierce feminist story, for people who are intrigued by the world building and by this very female-centric religious system. Is just incredible. And I gave Maresi 5 out of 5 stars. I got the finished copies as soon as I finished because that was an ARC version and I adored this book so much. And this is the most excited I have ever been to read a prequel story, because I believe this one is set before the events of the first, and just going off of the summary and of how much I adored the first book, like, I'm so ready for this, and I never get excited about prequels, so. The next book I finished was Shadow Spinner by Susan Fletcher, and this was for the challenge that was to read a fantasy book not set in a European setting. So this book is sort of inspired by the story of 1001 Nights or Scheherazade, but it's not really a retelling. We follow our main character Marjani, and she actually is sent to help Scheherazade because Scheherazade is starting to run out of stories. And that is kind of what sets everything in motion. Marjani has to find a particular story for Scheherazade, and she gets caught up in all of these like intrigues and politics. I also want to mention that as far as I know, this is not an Own Voices story in terms of the setting or like the race or ethnicity of the characters, but the author did do extensive research, and as far as I can tell from reviews, she did stay true to the story and the culture, but keep that in mind. So I really enjoyed this book overall. I really liked the writing. I really grew to love Marjani as our protagonist. I also want to mention the diversity in this book because Marjani is disabled, and religious persecution is also discussed in this book. Like, she stays with some relatives or some friends who are Jewish, and that is brought into the story as well. I really liked this take on the 1001 Nights story, and I really enjoyed the fact that it did keep some of the darker elements of the story, because the story of Scheherazade is like really terrifying actually, and I think sometimes we lose sight of that when we turn it into like a romance between Scheherazade and the Sultan. There's some very clear points made about like you can love people in spite of their doing terrible things, but forgiveness is not a given. Like, Marjani at the end of this book is still kind of horrified by what the Sultan did, and the fact that falling in love with your 100th wife or whatever after you killed all of the others does not absolve you of what you did to those other women. And I gave Shadow Spinner 4 out of 5 stars. And finally, the last book I picked up for the readathon was Sun and Moon, Ice and Snow by Jessica Day George, and this was for the challenge to read a standalone novel. This is a retelling of the fairy tale that I believe is called East of the Sun, West of the Moon. So our main character is a nameless girl because when she was born, her mother was so disappointed that she wasn't a boy that she decided not to even give her a name. And one day this girl, who is just known as the Lass, is approached by a magical talking bear, and she is asked to go to his castle and to live with him for I think a year and a day, and then she will be free to go back to her family. And because of all these kind of complicated reasons, she agrees to. There's some elements that kind of feel like Beauty and the Beast, in that there is this castle where there are servants and everybody is under this strange kind of spell that nobody can actually explain to her. So I did like the main character. I thought she was really funny and smart and interesting, and I also like the way that Jessica Day George built out the other elements around this fairy tale. I'm not super familiar with the fairy tale this is based on. I really liked the world building. I thought the writing was really engaging, and I did really enjoy some of the side characters of this book, but I did have a couple of issues with this one. And part of that is from, I think, limitations placed on this book by the source material. But you find out pretty quick that the bear is not the character he is, like, he appears to be, and that's part of the spell. And when the lass finally realizes this, her reactions kind of fell flat to me. Like, they didn't feel realistic. Basically, she rushes off to save him because, spoiler alert, it turns out he is a human prince in disguise or under a curse, and she does it like she's in love with him. But I just couldn't buy that. She rushes off to save this man's life, which would be fine. Like, I understand doing that for somebody who is your companion or your friend or who took care of you, and I think the author could have done that. But instead, it's framed as like she's rushing off to save the man she loves. And like, 10 minutes ago, she thought he was a bear. That was just really uncomfortable for me on a lot of levels, because even just setting aside the whole thing where it's like, you didn't actually know he was a human until very recently, so like, I don't think I can actually buy into you just retroactively kind of falling in love with him once you realize he is a person who you could actually, like, marry now that he's not an animal. So even just setting aside all those issues, I just feel like there wasn't enough interaction between them, or there wasn't enough meaningful interaction between them, because part of the curse is that the bear can't speak about certain things, and he actually just doesn't talk to her very much at all. Like, it's very straightforward things about, like, is she comfortable in the palace, like, what, like, tell me about your family back home and everything, and we're sort of told that she gets to know him very well without actually seeing it. I just couldn't buy into it. So overall, I liked more about this book than I disliked. I gave it 3.5 stars, but I'm not sure if I would recommend it or not. Like, if you're not a fan of fairy tale retellings, I don't think this would be the one to change your mind. Okay, everybody, so those are all of the books I read for the one readathon to rule them all. I really had a great time participating in the readathon, so please comment down below and let me know if you guys participated. If you have read any of the books I talked about, please let me know, or if you're going to pick any of them up. As you guys can probably tell, my favorite from the readathon was Maresi. I love that book so much, and I really want to know if you guys are going to pick it up now, because it was fantastic. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!